This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC, and we're in for a treat. We have a comedy roundtable. Now, you've heard a couple of these before. This one's focused on Sacramento. I have two tremendously funny, talented professionals that got their start in comedy right here in Sacramento, and one has gone off to a career as a professional photographer for the Sacramento Bee, and still is a photographer for AP Press. Is that the way to put it?
Associated Press, yeah.
Associated Press photographer. I'm very excited to have him here. Bentoni's in the house, and you've heard his interview before on the podcast. But for the first time on the show, we're happy to have another lifelong Sacramentan that did a lot of comedy back in the day and continued to do comedy and acting throughout his life. It's Brian Diamond, and we're excited to have him here. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sacramento's Comedy Roundtable. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, very exciting. So, guys, thanks for taking time out of your busy day. As I mentioned in the opening, Bentoni was kind enough to do an interview with me earlier on in the history of this podcast. And to give everybody a little backstory, he started off as a drop-in MC for me, and then he ended up hosting some of the open mics, and then he ended up being an opening act, and then he started doing more and more. And it was really fun to share those years with him. But he realized it may not be a career line, and he shifted over to professional photographer and made a huge career and just recently retired. So congratulations on that. And Brian, who started off, well, we should hear from him, his side of it, because my notes were pretty down and dirty on Brian Diamond. No, I'm just joking. But we're not as close friends, so I don't know. I don't remember. I'm an old guy as much of the history. But I know you worked for me a lot back in the day, and you got a chance to work both the Citrus Heights Club and the Old Town Club. Why don't you share with the audience, how did you kind of fall into stand-up comedy?
Well, before I tell you that, when you say a first time on your podcast, no, this is actually the first podcast I've ever done, so that's kind of a big.
Wow, that's exciting!
Yeah. I was going to say, how am I doing so far? Am I doing all right so far? It's the first time I've done this. How did I fall into comedy? I knew that I always wanted to do it. I don't think I took the traditional route of listening to comedy albums or watching stand-up comedians. The biggest influence for me were actually not even stand-up comedians per se, but certainly brilliant comic minds, and that were the Three Stooges. They were, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to.
Whoop, 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 whoop.
Oh, yeah. And so when I first started doing stand-up, I mean, I'd seen a couple of comedy, but going out and doing the open mics and even eventually I always used to ask, am I doing it right? Because I never studied the
art form.
Yeah, no, never did.
Now, did you go out and do pratfalls and poke yourself in the eyes?
No, but a lot of physical comedy. I always tried to do. I was actually funnier on stage than on the radio or on a podcast as it would be. I always did physical stuff, and I think you remember both my parents were deaf and communicated with sign language, and and I always admired the black comedians, which are very physical on stage, and so that was always my style, coupled with the Three Stooges, and I was used to.
So that was a lot of great information, but you didn't answer the question. How did you end up deciding to do an open mic or trying stand-up comedy? Did somebody just say, hey, you're funny, go do this? Or did you try my comedy competition? What was your first entry into the industry?
I've actually done this in job interviews before where they've asked me a question and I didn't answer.
It just goes blank.
So I knew that I actually started writing jokes when I was probably 15, writing commercials and this. There was no place to do stand-up in Sacramento. We were, before the Sacramento Kings, this was a cow town. It really was. And there was no place to do it. And I remember one day, it was in 1985, I was rafting on July 4th, and a friend of mine who I went to high school with went, hey, there's a place that does open mics on Wednesday nights, an amateur comedy night. And finally, after X number of years, like probably 4 years of talking about I'm going to do it, there was a place to do it, and went downtown. That's when I met Bentoni and probably a couple other people locals that you've had on the show. And then the goal was to get good enough to get to Laughs Unlimited, because that was the only club in town. But going from open mic to working a professional club, I mean, that's point A to point B. It takes a while, and it's a lot of...
Yeah, and it's been explained several times on this podcast, but for new listeners, Laughs Unlimited was an A room. We always had top quality headliners, Seinfeld, Leno, Saget, you name it. And so even to be at an opening act, you had to have material. You had to have a set. We were not, we were like I used to say it was like we were the university level. So there was the bars that you would do open mics, or the disco that was converting that would have an open mic night, and guys could test out some material. And then once they had 3 to 5 minutes, then they should show up at an open mic at a club like mine, or even in LA, the Ice House or the Improv. But you had to kind of have 5 minutes at least, and then you tried to grow from there. And if you didn't, quite frankly, you weren't asked back.
Mm-hmm.
You had to, you didn't want to put yourself out and bomb too bad too early, because it kind of stuck with you. And, but once you had those 5 minutes and you had a couple times on stage or done a couple open mics, then a club like mine, like Laughs Unlimited, would give you the opportunity to maybe do our open mics or be an MC or do the comedy competition. We had several of those. And Bentoni, that's kind of how you started.
Yeah.
You came to work, and I liked you right off the way. You had a few funny minutes. I wouldn't say you were, 20-minute, 30-minute strong in comedy. It was fairly new to you.
Yeah.
But I liked you, and you had a talent, and we worked together and developed you to where you became one of my regular house MCs and open acts, and you performed at the comedy competition, and I think even did the TV show and a few other things.
Yeah, I did the TV show twice, and I did I finished third in the competition.
Yeah,
So-
see, and you probably got beat out by, somebody that became a big act, Karen Anderson.
Who?
I just heard from her. I'm so excited. We're going to be getting together soon.
Oh, I loved her. Yeah.
For those that don't know, Karen Anderson was not only a regular act and MC at my clubs. She went on to comedy writing and ended up being the one of the lead writers for the Ellen Show for many years, and then
I didn't know that.
wrote for many other shows and is still writing comedy for TV. Made a nice career out of it.
Yeah. She's done well
Keep
for
waiting
herself.
for my check, but I haven't heard anything.
It's in the mail.
Yeah. So Brian, you got your start in some of the open micers, and then you, do you remember any early material? Was it always physical? Was there a joke?
What I remember about the early days, it was you said to me, you, maybe I'll tell you this, and you may remember. I used to kill at the open mics, and I was finally ready for a professional club, Laughs Unlimited, and you had said to me, yeah, but some of your material is crude. And I didn't understand what that meant. All I know is that it killed in the bars. And I've been doing it for 3 years. And
I was so sensitive, wasn't I?
No, but you were right. I didn't realize at the time, but it was, I was like, no. And what, as you progress in your career, just like, when a musician just first, starts to learn their craft, there's certain songs or style of music that they want to do. Well, there's a style of comedy that you want to, and I started getting rid of some of those things that you said were crude. But I think my big my big killer show closer, I used to do like Pee Wee Herman, Pee Wee Herman impression, of him like on a date having relations for the first time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, do you want to hear Pee Wee Herman having relations?
It killed. It was, my show closer, for a while. But, I used to do a lot of commercials. That was my big thing, my favorite commercial of this. And I used to do this big thing about, Head and Shoulders shampoo commercial. That itch could be telling you something, which, but you as the years go by, you start getting rid of stuff and writing more. a style that you want to go.
Right. And obviously my goal was to help you develop into being a better entertainer. And I was showcasing people that were getting sitcoms and going on in their careers. I wanted to keep the opening of the show, the opening act and the feature act, in that same vein, as clean as possible. Now, we had plenty of dirty acts and Bobcat Goldthwait and Bobby Slayton and a number of really funny people. Jack Marion came through that were really talented, but a little more what I would call blue comedy, or a little more risque. And there's a place for that. But generally speaking, me as a producer would talk to people, apparently like Brian, and we've heard it before in other shows, that there's a way to improve, and there's a goal you want to set for yourself, and that is to be relatable to the audience, be as clean as you can, because you'll get more work out of it, and just keep writing and working.
What I always thought about as far as clean comedy versus blue comedy is that if a lot of times you can have really crude material that gets laughs, but they're nervous laughs. And I always thought that I wanted to write stuff that would be funny, even if it was clean, because then the idea is funny,
right?
And that's
it's pure. It's not shock humor,
right?
No,
there were places when I working out on the road where if you're just doing clean comedy, that it would not work. Certain rooms, they want the filth.
You mean Bob's dildo room? Yeah, they're probably.
And so I could take all that clean material and dirty it up, and they would like it. But if you've got a crowd that doesn't want to hear the dirty material,
trying to clean it up,
then the humor's gone.
No, that's a good point, that it's easier for a clean comic to make his material a little edgier for an audience that needs that to get their attention, let's say a drunk crowd or a Friday Night Late Show, as opposed to a dirty comic all of a sudden getting that church gig and going, how do I clean this up? No, that's a really interesting point.
I had a gig one time, I forget where. Oh, it was in Pocatello, Idaho.
Oh, been there often.
Okay, and
Stop bragging.
Okay, I work the big rooms, but it's a big Mormon town.
Oh,
and at the last minute, I get a call from the booker who said, "You and the other comic, you have to be 100% clean." And the other comic, he kind of went through mentally his act. He went, and so could not perform
at all.
And so I had to do the show by myself. I had to stretch from my little 30-minute thing to an hour and a half.
Did you do it?
Yes.
Wow, that's incredible! Wow, kudos. That's not easy to do.
Yeah.
Well, so
clean.
Obviously, but that's interesting. There's got to have been some nightmare road stories. I mean, for me, I'm a producer, and I was doing a show out of town once, and I made it clear that we have to have such and such stage and such lighting and a reasonable sound system. And then you show up, and the lighting is a floodlight 20 feet off, and the stage is like a 6-inch riser, and the microphone was like a Mr. Microphone with no speaker. Oh. And they want me to bring in, Dana Carvey, and it's like, it ain't gonna happen. But I had that happen once where somebody booked, this was not a huge show, but I mean, I think they paid $1,000, and I could have easily rented the material, the equipment, and done it professionally. No, we have it handled. And then you show up, and it was just a nightmare.
Those are all the invisible things that people don't realize what makes something successful. And working at, I think one of the first times I worked at your club was with Willie Tyler and Lester.
Oh, great act.
And for the uninitiated, Willie Tyler and Lester was ventriloquist, traveled with his dummy Lester, and he told me something that stayed with me. Actually, I'm not sure if he told me or if Lester told me, but it stayed with me nonetheless. And he said, do you ever notice you'll do the same exact joke, same exact material in the same exact order and get a different response on and he goes, there's so many factors that go into it, like what time of night you go on, what day of the week, who do you follow, how's the sound system, how's the lighting system, and truer words were never spoken. And it's to that stuff that you talk about. Those little things. The audience gets points for a successful show, but the sound system, the lighting system, the room layout, and when you talk about rough times on the road, we've all done the hell gig one-nighters, because when people go to a comedy club like what you had, which is a week long, they are there to see comedy. You're selling one product, comedy. But a lot of these one-nighters, it's a place that does comedy one night a week, like a hotel, a sports bar, a biker bar, a strip club, a laundromat,
bingo parlor.
Yeah, and they're not there to see comedy, and they certainly don't have the infrastructure to make it successful. And those same jokes that would kill, in your room, or in rooms like yours, you would be pulling teeth. So you needed, in order to do 30 minutes, you better have an hour's worth of material.
Because you got to fill time. You're not going to have the laughs to fill it. You bring up a really good point, Brian, and that is that one of the things I've tried to share with the audience over and over is stand-up comedy, to me, is one of the hardest forms of entertainment out there, because of all the nuances. Every audience is different. Every interaction is different. And then you take all those things you talked about, from staging and lighting and sound to the day of the week. We've all know the difference between a Friday 8 p.m. show and a Friday late show. It's and the comic or the entertainer has to adapt to try to work with that audience. Whereas the singer and a dancer, they go out and dance the same thing, or they sing the same song. And it doesn't matter if there's 2 people or 100 drunk people, you're going to just perform the same piece. Stand-up comedy, you don't have that luxury.
Well said. Yeah.
It's so interesting and scary at the same time. In fact, it's interesting. I feel lucky. It was pointed out recently that I may have more stage time than any comic I've worked with, because I was on stage 6 nights a week for over 21 years. And I bombed dozens of times. I killed dozens of times.
With the same material.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. Basically, I'm just being me. I don't do jokes.
Don't sell yourself short, Scott. You bombed hundreds of times.
I'm the witness. Well, thank you, Bentoni. And that's the last of him. No, but it is so true that we, as whether you're a master of ceremonies or a stand-up comic, and that's where I'm using the we, have to be adaptable to the situation, because if we don't engage, first, get the attention of the audience, which is even harder these days with cell phones and everything. We didn't quite have that issue back in the 80s, but get the attention and then connect with the audience to really even be able to engage with them and the type of humor that you do. Now, Brian, I will say that being more physical, it's kind of like shiny. People are more apt to pay attention. I told you I just interviewed this impressionist. Then he's got the physical, the voice, and the material. So he's got like a triple threat to try to grab their attention. But most stand-up comics, it's just them and their material. And that's a challenging thing. Do you remember a time that you had like amazing success or amazing bomb that is stuck with you?
I've had both. I want to go back to Bentoni's thing about being dirty and clean. I would say that it's good to have both of those in your arsenal. I think I would be the journeyman or proverbial road comic. I mentioned before, I worked in all 50 states. And in order to do that, that was every kind of venue that you could possibly imagine.
Right.
And you needed all that stuff. And we may all be one country, but there's different styles of humor. And
trust me, an audience in the South is way different than an audience in New York City.
Yes, and having a lot of material to draw from, I was very fortunate. But I had Southern comedians go, you out here from California, ain't too many. You guys do too good out here. You guys come out here from New York, you don't do too good. And that's not impression. That's the way they talk. And I, had a lot of. So it's good to have both of them. And sometimes, even Shakespeare, had like the X-rated material for the groundlings. You just everybody. You got to have a little bit. There's times to be an artist and times to be an entertainer.
That's right.
That's interesting. You know, I haven't heard that before. And if I have, I don't remember. That's a great distinction. Entertainer and artist.
Right.
Because there's times when you have that
Patent
connection.
pending.
It's so true. But I mean, if you're an artist, you're allowed to really work your art form like Seinfeld or Leno does. And if you're an entertainer, you're gonna do what is necessary to entertain that audience, whether it's 100 drunk people in a strip club or it's in front of a concert hall and it's your crowd. You always have to adapt. That's interesting. We've kind of gone off tangent, but fascinating stuff. Interesting aspects of stand-up comedy. Going back to Brian, we haven't had a chance to really tell everybody. We've already alluded, and he's been interviewed before. Bentoni did some comedy with me for maybe a decade and then kind of moved into professional photography. You stayed in the industry. You told me pre-show that you were interested in being an actor. And so you were kind of combining your interest in acting and your stand-up comedy, but you were able to stay in the industry most of your working career, right?
I did. I had a nice 17-year run there, and all I ever wanted to be was Paul Reiser or Michael Keaton. That's those.
Those are your goals.
They were, comedians that did serious acting work, and they were my goal models. And if you want to do that, eventually at some point you got to move to LA, and so that became like the second part of my career. To come off the road and only, and get to be an actor, you got to wait tables. So, waited tables in LA, would still do stand up at all the clubs, the Improv, the Laugh Factory, the Ice House, the Comedy Store. And I'd go out on the weekends, but my full living out of a suitcase, was the first part from like 90 to 98. And I'll tell you, it's the hardest thing about that. When you make your sole living as a comedian, talk about being an artist and entertainer, there are gigs you don't want to do, but if that's your only source of income,
you do it.
You do it.
Well, making a livelihood is kind of important to all of us.
Yeah.
You got to pay the bills and buy the food. So it's interesting you mentioned that because I've had other entertainers tell me some have made the choice. I'm just going to stay on the road because, quite frankly, I don't want to live in LA and I don't want to do the Hollywood thing. Steve Bruner's a great example. Tim Bedore. These are people that made a great living doing stand-up comedy and still do in a lot of cases by being on the road and just being a professional comic. They make their big bucks doing corporate and stuff like that. Cruise ships. Mark Gaffey's out in a cruise ship right now, but they didn't want to pull that trigger like you did and kind of combine it with acting. And we all know lots of people that did that. Larry Miller, you mentioned Paul Reiser. They both worked for me and ended up in Hollywood and ended up on TV shows or movies. They were at essence stand-up comics, but their goal, their interest was to turn that stage time into acting time. And they succeeded, just like Jerry did and Jay. Everybody kind of finds a different path, but you did point out there's two roads. One is staying a stand-up comic and being on the road and making a living that way, or going to LA or New York and trying to create a career through the acting side of it. So you mentioned that you kind of got your start at Laughs Unlimited. Did you get a chance to work with some of these people? Like I mentioned, Paul Reiser worked my room and some others. Who did you work with?
Quite a few people, but you mentioned Jerry Seinfeld, and when I worked with him was in '89, and he was announcing this new show that he was coming out with called the Seinfeld Chronicles, which later became Seinfeld. But when you remember when it first came out, it was
Seinfeld Chronicles.
And he, when we talk about how rough it is in these rough rooms and whatnot, I've always used to say the difference between Jay and Jerry and all that, when people go out to see those, they are going out to see them.
Right.
But when you go to, the sports bar on Tuesday night or, the bait and tackle shop on Wednesday, when they're doing, they're not there to see Bentoni. They're there to see, right. And so that adds that whole other layer of why you want all that dirty material and clean material and everything.
You got to have a quiver with every arrow in it.
Yeah. But Jerry told me, he says, don't ever throw any material away. He says, because when you become famous, C material becomes A material.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a story that what a segue. Thank you for setting this up. My first night in L.A. This was my welcome to L.A. I was still living in Sacramento, but I was making my national television debut on a show called An Evening at the Improv, and I was so excited.
Oh, that's
It's a
cool.
big deal, yeah. And so I went down there and I worked it out with the booker. I said, well, hey, and that's the time they had a club in Santa Monica. Where they were filming the show, but then they had the Hollywood Improv. And I said, well, hey, could I do my set the night before to practice what I'm going to do tomorrow night? Oh, yeah, sure, come down. You go, and it's just heavyweight after heavyweight after heavyweight, right? And you keep getting bumped. This person walked in. It was back to back to back. Bill Maher, and then Wayne Cotter, who at the time had the show Comic Strip Live, and then right after him was Bill Maher and Wayne Cotter, and then Charles Fleischer.
Oh my God!
And then Jerry
Comic
walks
genius.
in. Right?
Oh no!
And Jerry, and I said, "Hey, folks, we have a surprise guest, Mr. Jerry Seinfeld." Of course, I got bumped.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Wait, Jerry, would you wait a minute? We have Brian Diamond here.
Doing a show here.
So he comes on stage, please, and it's he hasn't even said a word. And I sit in the back of the room, and it's like 45, 55 seconds of and I remember he said, C material becomes A material, right?
Yeah.
And and he's how many comedians can you see? And it does. And then Charles Fleischer went on after him, and he's high energy like Robin Williams. And now, please welcome Brian Diamond.
Your headliner.
In the suicide spot.
And I didn't know. It's my first night in L.A., and I get up on stage, and I'm hitting them with my best stuff. Nothing.
Oh.
People are looking at me, they're kind of like picking their teeth, like, what does the busboy get to come up and do some time? And I'm hitting them.
That's tough.
All the stuff that I'm going to do tomorrow night on my national television, stuff that's tried and true, road proven, and I'm dying. And finally, I just stopped and I went, wait a minute. And I addressed the audience. I said, if Jerry Seinfeld were up here saying these same exact jokes word for word, you guys would be falling out of your chairs. But because it's me, it's so quiet in here right now, you could hear a career drop. And the audience,
probably loved that.
They applauded. And you know what? For the last minute and a half, 2 minutes, I got big laughs. I was able to get my dignity and walk out. And then the next night I did the same exact killed.
Good.
Yeah.
Whew, I was sweating that.
Yeah.
But that's a great story to tell that shares with anybody out there that's interested in stand-up comedy, that you never know the situation. You never know who you're going to have to follow. I mean, going back to Clean and Dirty, one of my jobs as a producer is I couldn't let an opening act go up and do I went to the frickin' store to get some frickin' bread for my frickin' bitch wife, and then follow that with somebody totally clean like Tim Bedore or Steve Bruner or somebody. It sets the audience up for that comic to fail. And my job is to make the comics look good as the producer. But I think that's a great LA story, because that only happens in places like that. However, a great little side story. Bob Saget was working my room. He was already a name act, but he and I go way back, and he was the headliner. And it was Saturday night, and he's about a half hour into his 1 hour set, and Robin Williams dropped in.
I heard of him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you might have heard of him. Yeah. And I go running out on stage. Hey, ladies and gentlemen. Bob's like, what?
I'm
And
trying
I
to
go,
work
sorry,
here.
Bob. So, ladies and gentlemen, Robin Williams. Robin comes out, does like a 45-minute set, and Bob's in the back of the green room, so pissed at me and so upset. But he never actually said anything. I heard about it after the fact, much later, that I really hurt his feelings. But it's frickin' Robin Williams, and I'm a producer in this little club in Sacramento. You don't say, Robin, can I go on stage for a few minutes? No.
Yeah, you'll have to wait.
Yeah, Brian Diamond's coming. Would have Wouldn't it be funny though if Bob sang it? Stop! Sorry to interrupt your set. Brian Diamond's here. Yeah. Wouldn't that? Oh, that would have been a great joke.
I waited for that day to happen. So, can I just add a little
addendum to the story? Sure.
Yeah. So that was my welcome to LA, but then that happened numerous times over the years. Fast forward, 6-7 years later, now I know how to play the game when it does happen. And I was out at the Ice House in Pasadena, and I'm taping, which is a great room to tape. And who drops in but Arsenio Hall?
Oh.
And it was him making his comeback because his show was, hugely successful. He went away for a little while, and then he came back, blah, blah, blah.
Did he bring the dog pound with him?
The dog pound was already there when he stepped up on stage. Now, he's only going to do 5. Well, 5 became 25. And I'm sitting in the back pace, and I go, I'm taping.
Yeah.
And I got to follow that. Yeah. And so, but I went up on stage, and when they introduced me after he crushed the room, and I grabbed the mic and I was kind of solemn, and I said, folks, when I first moved to LA, they told me there will come a point, something will happen where that you've made it in this town. And I think that night is tonight, because Arsenio Hall opened for me.
I knew you were going there. That is so great. The
crowd went crazy. And 30 seconds later, they forgot him, and I went on, got a great tape out of it.
Oh, that is so funny. And, at the core of what we're talking about, when those situations happen, honesty really is the best policy. Mm-hmm. If you stop and tell the audience and put them in, it not only personalizes you, but it brings the audience into the inside, kind of what we talked about, the peek behind the curtain, where if you said, hey, there's no way for me to follow Charles Fleischer and Jerry Seinfeld, so I'm just me, right? You're being honest, you're opening yourself, and audiences respect that and appreciate that. Another quick story. Gary Shandling was on my stage, and he'd done about a half hour, and he'd already proven himself, and he was already kind of a name act. And he said, hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm doing the Tonight Show next week, and I need to try some new material. Is that okay? Yeah, They loved it. And he sat and read off of 3x5 cards for about 10 minutes. And most of them were funny because it's Gary, but some were clunkers. And he'd go, oh, well, that's out. And he'd throw it away. The audience loved that they were being entrusted with the future of his material, and that what he was saying was going to be heard on the Tonight Show 7 days later. And it just goes to honesty, and can only engage the audience more if you share that with them. And that's what stand-up comedy is different than other art forms.
Somebody was asking me about how comics recover if they got an audience that's just not responding. And I told him a couple of stories of comics that I'd seen, and Tim Jones, you remember Tim Jones? He was always funny, and he had a ton of material. And he was great. And so, but one night, he's up there. He's been up for like 20 minutes and getting nothing from this audience. And I'm going, I can't believe they're not laughing at this guy. He's hilarious, right? And I was familiar with his material, but he stopped doing the material. He just kind of took a breath, and then just started to chat with them. Not doing material, not being funny necessarily, but just, hey,
a little more improv-ish.
Not even improv. I mean, just
conversation.
You just stopped the show to talk to him. Also, what are you doing today? What's going on? And he talked to him for a couple of minutes and a couple of more minutes, and then he worked back into his material. And after that, they loved him.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That I've seen that happen. I mean, I don't know if I was there that night, but Tim Jones, again, very, very funny guy. And that technique. And I thought you were going to say he started just working the crowd. I don't know if I mentioned it in this show, but I did a concert once with Jay Leno, sold out over 2,000 seats. Jay did an hour and a half of material, which isn't easy. But what was interesting is an hour in, he kind of shifted and just started asking people in the audience questions, had the house lights brought up, and he did like 20 minutes of just riffing off of the people in the audience, and then he went back and closed with his closing material. And genius of it was that it engaged the audience. He added 20 minutes to a set, and it was funny. And he didn't have to write anything. He was just improving off what the audience was giving him. And just like Tim Jones, he was taking it from a presentation of material to, hey, you're here, I'm here. We're all in this together. What do you want to talk about? Obviously, you don't want to hear my material. What do you want to talk about?
I think that what I came to find out is that audiences like to be part of the creative process.
Yeah.
And I remember did like an hour one time clean, not one curse word, which is very hard to do. Yeah. And
I'm about to cuss right now.
Damn it.
And I had all, like I say, all original material that took me years and years and years to formulate and craft. And I had a little banter with somebody in the front row, and I had to, bar drunk, and you had to put him in his place. Somebody comes after the show. The only thing he said, "Yeah, man, the way that you did that guy in front, that was great," And I went, an hour, and you picked up that 30 seconds.
Isn't that so tough on your ego? Yeah. You had an hour of material, and what they took away was the 5 minutes with the drunk.
Yes. But I realized when that happened, they love to be part of the creative process. And you were going to ask you were asking about the hell gigs or what the things that happen on the road because I have a story for you that January of 2002, very important that you know this date, because we are 4 months removed from September 11th.
Right.
Oh, did I mention that? Yeah, I did. Okay. So I'm up in Portland at a club called Harvey's. One of the best in the
club.
One of the best in the nation. It wasn't a Laughs Unlimited, but it was a great room.
Thank you. Score one for him.
And this big room, and it was right there, in the downtown area by the bus depot. And any city, any comic will tell you, any city going wherever the bus depot is, that's the bad side of town.
Yeah.
So you'd have like street people wander into the club, and I'm up on stage, and I see this guy pacing back and forth, like a cat, like a lion or a cat, and I can see him. The audience can't see him because their back's turned, and I could just see him getting riled up and looking at me, and he wasn't liking the material that I was doing or something. And then all of a sudden, this guy starts running full blast towards the stage. Now it's a big room, so he's way in the back. This is a very cavernous room. And instantly I'm thinking, okay, what do I do? Because he's running right towards me. I said, and you're elevated up on the stage. I go, do I kick him in the face? Do I hit him over the head with? I said, because if you do that, the show's over. There's no comedy.
There's no coming back from that.
No comedy. When a comedian kicks somebody in the face, the show's over at that point.
Then I'm dumb.
I played rooms where that's just getting started. There we go.
And so he's running, and while I'm trying to figure out what do I do? Do I move? I'm trying to figure out what to do. Out of nowhere, the bartender comes out from the service bar, and the doorman comes on, and they tackle him right there in front of the stage, knocked over the cocktail table. A guy and his date or his wife, or he was with her, he gets up, and they're kicking him and punching him and everything right there in front of him. And then they pick him up, and they take him out this side door where there's a side bar there, and the door slams. And it is complete silence.
Oh, the audience is stunned.
I'm stunned. We're all stunned. I mean, it was like, and everybody's looking at me, and I just said, I hate when my father comes to my shows.
Good save.
And of course, the audience goes, and then I said, and look at you, sir. I said, after September 11th, we don't take no guff in this, and man, they're going crazy. Man, so now I'm pacing up and down the stage, and I'm getting riled up, and I said, Jerry. The crowd is going crazy. I mean, I don't have to buy a drink ever in Portland ever again for that night.
You were the star.
Right. But, the club owner calls me the next day, and he goes, I heard all about it. Oh, my gosh. The thing is, if that situation plays out 1,000 times, you're going to get a different result. It was just in that one moment that...
Yeah, and you were able to not only survive it, but play off it, and as opposed to crumbling, you stood up to the situation and you had a response, and the audience respected that. Yeah, that's truly a nightmare story. So we have to wrap this up, but before we do, one last question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Bentoni. You were a number of years in stand-up, and it, I'm sure, taught you a lot of things. What would be your takeaway that helped your life from what you learned being a comic and getting stage time? Was there something that stayed with you through the rest of your life?
Yes. Before I did stand-up comedy, I was a very introverted, quiet, shy person.
No.
I swear. And once I started doing stand-up, it just disappeared. And one thing's for sure. I mean, you do stand-up every night, in a different place every time. You gain some self-confidence.
Oh, you have
and,
to. Yeah.
A lot of people say one of the most common fears that people have is public speaking. I have no fear of public speaking. And so
Because of those years.
Because of exactly. And so if nothing else, it's given me some self-confidence and
self-esteem, and that's all good stuff. Yeah. Brian, would you say that there was something that all your years on stage gave you that carried you through the last couple decades?
Yeah, scar tissue. That is a great question, and I'm sorry you're out of time because the list is endless. But to try to truncate as much, you learn so much from this. Being up on stage is only a small fraction of it. It's all the logistics planning, getting yourself, from this city to that city, and on a shoestring budget. Learning how, contract negotiations, marketing, public relations.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the list goes on. And so what that turned into, my post life, because I'm not doing stand up. I told you I left it, came back. I didn't really intend to leave it. What happened? I was actually supposed to come into an extraordinary amount of money.
And they lived,
right.
sadly.
No, I really thought this money was going to come through, and so I was getting these emails from Nigeria. And people told me it's a scam, and I said, no, I said it's for real. They've already asked for the routing number for my checking account. I mean, it's coming.
Any day now.
But what the afterlife, if you will, that I've had since I've left, I left the business after 17, 20 years, whatever, is I've been able to help people plan weddings, funerals. I've spoken at a lot of events and host because of all the stuff that you talked about at the beginning of the podcast, the lighting, the sound, the way that everything faces, all that stuff makes a difference in a wedding. It makes a difference in a funeral, in a graduation, a party. All of that stuff makes it a success or not. So what time of day you do it? Going back to Willie Tyler and Lester.
Wow.
All those things that make a show. Yeah. And I would say the number one thing, temperature control. I had a one-person play that ran for 6 weeks in LA, and the theater director called me one day and he says, the air conditioning's broke. I said, it's going to be the worst show of the whole run. It's going to be the worst show. Because the thing is, I don't care how funny you are. Yeah. If people are hot and sweaty, they don't care what's going on on stage.
Yeah, they're not comfortable.
They're not comfortable.
Right. Wow, you picked up a lot of stuff in your career, and I'm so glad you pointed out how important staging and logistics and marketing and all the things in my book and in my online comedy course. It's trying to teach stand-ups that you're the product that you not only have to develop and grow, but you have to sell and you have to contract for and you have to live on maybe limited funds, and all those things are important.
Maybe.
You're lucky.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of things. Sadly, we've run out of time, but I can't thank you two enough. It's means a lot to me to have a comedy roundtable in my hometown on my kitchen table with comics that created a career right here in Sacramento and have something. Bentoni, thank you so much for coming back and doing this.
Sure.
And good luck in what you're doing tonight.
Yeah.
And Brian, thank you so much for joining us for the first time on the podcast and sharing such insightful stuff about your obviously successful career in stand-up and acting and all the things that it brought to your life. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yes.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's been our Comedy Roundtable out of Sacramento, California. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back on Sunday with another great show. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.